Hyde Park in Dutchess County, New York. How FDR made this one of the most important places on earth. From his ancestral home in Hyde Park, Franklin Delano Roosevelt altered World War II and ruled history both then and now by the strategies, diplomacy, and monumentous decisions made with the world leaders at his residence in Hyde Park in Dutchess County, New York. The Roosevelt family has always been part of the earliest history of New York. As descendants of the original Dutch settlers, FDR's family rose to the top of New York politics and then national politics with the election of FDR's cousin, Teddy Roosevelt, as the 26th President of the United States from 1901 to 1909. Franklin was raised at Hyde Park by his doting mother and father and loved his home immensely. In his first term as president, FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt campaigned passionately to raise money for Bard College to help it survive the Great Depression. Both he and Eleanor wrote many letters to wealthy people who they thought could contribute to Bard College. From these letters, the Roosevelts, with donations from their political friends and contacts, saved the life of Bard College. All through his presidency, FDR frequently returned home to Hyde Park for rest, relaxation, and to entertain foreign diplomats and world leaders. As war became apparent in Europe in 1939, FDR began using Hyde Park as headquarters early in the beginning of World War II, where he hosted the Crown Prince of Norway and Denmark on May 1st, 1939, at Hyde Park to negotiate how the U.S. could help their countries in the efforts to fight Adolf Hitler. FDR even brought the Crown Prince to the dedication of the new Rhinebeck post office, where they placed the cornerstone together. After this important summit, FDR realized he must strengthen the relationship with England and prepare to enter the war as their ally. One of FDR's next uses of Hyde Park was to invite Queen Elizabeth and King George of Great Britain so he could rebuild the bonds with the English leaders and open a direct dialogue with them to plan how they could help Great Britain fight Nazi Germany and Italy. The royal couple arrived at Hyde Park on June 10, 1939, with much fanfare. Roosevelt immediately began working with them to demonstrate how America could help them in their fight. The royals were not overly impressed, though, with FDR's home at Hyde Park, but they did enjoy the friendliness of the American president and the people. FDR even had a famous hot dog picnic at his top cottage in Hyde Park to demonstrate American support for the cause and to share American ideals. This visit went a long way in reestablishing relationships with British leaders and gave them a much-needed boost to the morale of Great Britain and their people. By 1940, most people in the world knew of Hyde Park and its importance to FDR and his presidency. As the war rolled on, FDR would spend many days at Hyde Park with his top military commanders, including George Marshall and his top advisor Harry Hopkins, strategizing the war and writing speeches, including his Four Freedoms speech, which FDR gave January 6, 1941. The speech insisted that people in all nations of the world share Americans' entitlement to four freedoms: the freedom of speech and expression, the freedom to worship God in his own way, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. As Winston Churchill took over duties as Prime Minister of Great Britain, Roosevelt quickly began building his friendship with him. Again, Roosevelt used Hyde Park as a tool and setting for negotiations and planning, inviting Churchill and his top commanders to meet with him and the American commanders on June 19, 1942. This meeting was a huge event in world history. By this time, Hyde Park was protected by an entire regiment of soldiers, the 240th Military Police Regiment, consisting of 300 men who patrolled the 1,500 acres of the Roosevelt compound. At these negotiations, Churchill and Roosevelt made arguably the most important decision ever made in world history at that time: the decision to design and build the atomic bomb in the United States and use it to defeat the Empire of Japan. As the war dragged on, Roosevelt continued to visit Hyde Park many times, arriving by train from a secret train station located below the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Manhattan. On September 12, 1943, Winston Churchill returned with his staff to meet FDR at Hyde Park for important discussions and military planning for D-Day and the ongoing battle in Italy at Salerno. As the war began to wind down, FDR's health began to fail, so there was no further summits planned or held at Hyde Park, but FDR and his family continued to visit for rest and relaxation. Franklin Delano Roosevelt died on April 12, 1945, after 4 terms as president. He died at his home in Warm Springs, Georgia, of a massive cerebral hemorrhage. After a solemn state funeral, attended by many world leaders, FDR was buried at his beloved home at Hyde Park. The body of perhaps the greatest American president is buried at Hyde Park next to Franklin Delano Roosevelt Presidential Library. As the world plunged into the greatest global conflict ever known from 1939 to 1945, Hyde Park in Dutchess County, New York, the home of FDR, became the site of many history-altering decisions whose consequences are still felt today. The very emergence of the United States as the principal superpower began during this period of time, and the walls of Hyde Park were witness to these decisions. From the initial rebuilding of friendships with European royalty to the bromance of FDR and Churchill, the Hudson Valley was the stage it all played out on. Numerous strategies were discussed and planned here by the very top brass of the British and American military. From the invasion of North Africa and Italy to the development and usage of the atomic bomb, all were planned and executed at Hyde Park. This is a history that all America should be made aware of and realize the historical evidence that Hyde Park in Dutchess County played in the history of the world. As FDR once said, "All that is within me cries out to go back to my home on the Hudson River."